start. So the lectures today are the beginning of the second half of the semester. There are a whole series of outlines. Two lectures today are Sus-1, Sustainability 1, and Concrete 1. But you have concrete, steel, and enclosure system outlines found out for the second half of the semester. Okay, on Thursday, we will start in here with an introduction to assignment 2. And after that introduction, you will then go to meet with your TAs, and they will give you your, they will assign your wall section or your second drawing. So everybody in here on Thursday, please, at 1 o'clock. Also on Thursday, assignment 1 and exam 1 will be returned. Help, right? Okay. Exam grade. The median. So this means that half were above and half below. The median was 63. So that's a bit tough, but it's not, you shouldn't be, it's about maybe 3 points below previous years. So you should focus, you need to think about it. Now that you know what the exams are like, you hopefully, can marshal your energy. I don't mind if you want to record the lectures, that's okay, right? You have all the images, you can record the lectures, whatever you need to do to help yourself in that regard. If you have any questions on the exam, once you get them back, please see me, ask me. And if you have questions on your drawing grades, please talk to your TAs first. And then if there's any issue, let me know. So for the midterm grades that we'll post on Hub, we don't do any curving. No. But midterm grades are midterm grades, right? They don't stay on your record. They can go up, they can go down. At the end of the semester, we do curve. But just to put this in context, we usually, when we adjust the curve, it's usually by something like about 3 points maximum. In other words, the cutoff for an A would go from A minus would go from 90 down to 87 max, right? So it's not like, a 10-point adjustment. So, and if you're concerned when you receive your midterm grade and you want to see me, then let me know. Send me an email and we can go through it. Okay, so this is a quick view of the buildings that you're going to be drawing in the second half. They're larger scale buildings, mostly 2-3 stories. The first one is Conibear's Shell House. That's a growing club for the University of Washington. And this is a steel frame building with kind of typical steel construction, shall we say. It's a 2-story building. All 3 of these buildings are by Miller Hull Architects. Miller Hull are based in Seattle. Several years ago, they were named AIA Practice of the Year, National Practice of the Year. They're very good architects. And so, they, again, provide us a useful way of learning how to do construction documents and how to design. So this is a county office building called Kitsap. It's a mixture of site-cast and precast concrete. It's 2 blocks. If you look at my hand, 1 block like this and 1 like that. and they step up the hill, and one of the blocks has planted roofs. And the third is the Pierce County admin building. So these are county office buildings. Again, a mixture of precast and site cast concrete, 2 and 3 stories, but mostly what you'll be drawing is 2 stories. These architects are quite interested in sustainability, and so some aspects of the design may be helpful to you in thinking about your own projects. I'm not going to lecture specifically about these projects. So in the first half of the semester, there was a big tie-in between what you were drawing and what, we talked about in lecture. We talked about the 3 houses. But these, I'm not going to give lectures on. There'll be other case studies. In your folders, in your student folder, which has been uploaded for assignment 2, there are pages from the Miller whole book about each of the buildings that have photographs, they have good text, they have good diagrams, so those will be there to help you, in addition to the construction documents. We'll talk about those on Thursday. Just to say, each set of construction documents this time has about 100 sheets, 100 drawings, and so we're going to, you don't need to know all 100 drawings, you'll be relieved to know. We're going to give you a roadmap to help you navigate and find the drawings you need to do the wall section that you're assigned. But just say that sounds overwhelming, but this project, this was Terminal 5 at Heathrow for British Airways. So it's a huge building. It took about 5 years on site, but it took 10 years to design and get approved. There were 25,000 two-dimensional drawings on this building and 25,000 three-dimensional drawings, all of which had to be coordinated. So just to give you a sense of the kind of the way that information explodes with the size of the building, the amount of information needed. The bigger the building, the bigger the set of construction documents. Okay. So we're going to start the second half of the semester by focusing on sustainability. It's not an isolated topic. It kind of permeates every material and every construction system. And so we could only talk about sustainability the whole semester if we wanted to. But I want to focus on it today, and then we'll try and also, as we talk about each material, talk about its pluses and minuses. So the most common definition of sustainability is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising future generations. I'm sure you've heard this before in other classes. Yeah? Has Martha talked about this? Sure. And so that's easy to understand. How do we provide for ourselves without damaging the prospects of those who are coming in the future? Alejandro Aravena, who's a Chilean architect who won the Pritzker Prize in 2016, defines sustainability as nothing but the rigorous use of common sense. I like this definition. If we use our common sense, we could design more sustainable buildings. If we do obvious things. So why is it important for us? Because 40% of the energy used in the United States in total is used by buildings. And 40% of transportation in the US is related to the transportation of building materials. So we are responsible for a huge chunk of the market, shall we say. So it's a complicated issue. It's going to increasingly affect our lives as architects and everything that we do. And just to make the point that we're not simply talking about the price of a gallon of gasoline. We are talking about that, but that's not the only issue. It's about how we can inhabit the planet responsibly. So it's not an optional extra these days. There was a time when architects who were known or interested in sustainability established a special niche for themselves. Now we all need to think about these issues as we design. It's not an optional extra. So it permeates every aspect of our lives. It's not just the price at the pump. So for example, the predominant settlement pattern in the United States is the dispersed suburban pattern of settlement, which consumes much virgin land and agricultural land, and it requires a lot of highway infrastructure and services infrastructure to make it viable. So it has some minuses, many pluses but many minuses. This suburban pattern of living also discourages walking, and when we don't walk a lot, we become less healthy, so a number of health issues can arise from this. That's not sustainable, right, for our individual selves. And of course, the price of gas at the pump. On the right is, what it was like not so long ago, and on the left, what it's like at the moment, due to circumstances totally outside of our control as architects, right? As much as we would like to be able to control this, we can't. Cities, in contrast with suburban patterns of settlement, are more compact. They have higher density, so they consume less land per person, right? They're not consuming so much agricultural land and virgin land, and because they're more compact, public transportation becomes viable, and people aren't car dependent who live in cities. People who live in cities also tend to walk more. A recent exhibition about New York City made an interesting point. It said, New York City is a model green community. We don't usually think about New York City as being a model green community. But measured by energy used per person, Manhattan is the greenest place in America. And this is because of its high density. Very, very compact, lots and lots of people. But cities have their own health issues. They're very concentrated, they're very dense, and so pollution in cities is very dense, more dense than in rural areas. And so we have a high incidence of respiratory illnesses in cities. So it's not as if one is perfect and the other is totally wrong. They both have advantages, they both have disadvantages. What we eat is related to sustainability. So this is an image of the sustainable food supply chains that Walmart is developing. So we don't usually think of Walmart as being a proponent of sustainability, but they're putting a lot of energy at the moment into developing sustainable supply chains, which means that they're buying fish from suppliers that don't overfish and just deplete the stock. They're trying to have more local food products on their shelves to reduce their transportation costs. And they're requiring their suppliers to reduce their packaging and their transportation costs, right? So not just themselves, but all of their supply chain. They're also seeking to reduce the amount of energy used in their stores by 30%. And they're doing this principally by incorporating skylights in these big box buildings, which previously were totally electrically lit. they have coincidentally discovered that areas of the store with natural daylight have a higher per square foot sale amount than areas that are electrically lit. So it makes good sense, it's good business for them as well. So they're involved in this, partly for ethical reasons, but also because it all makes good business sense. If we can reduce our transportation costs, we can reduce our packaging, if we can reduce our energy costs, it's better for the business, right? Now, this isn't an ad for Walmart, because on the building front, they're very bad. So they build a big box store, and they use it for 10 years, and then they walk away from it, and they build a new one about a half a mile down the road. So if you Google Walmart buildings online, you will find many photographs of abandoned Walmarts. That seems to be, what's mainly photographed. So they're not exemplary in that regard. Other big retailers are also taking dramatic steps. So Amazon now has a fleet of 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. That's a big move and a big shift in the economy. They're not so good on cardboard packaging, right? Lots and lots of cardboard packaging, lots and lots of waste that they're producing. The new corporate headquarters of Apple in California, in Silicon Valley, the entire roof is covered by solar panels. They generate more electricity than they need. They are returning electricity to the grid. They're selling it back to the grid. And their goal is to be net zero by 2040. Even Lego, right? So if you go into Lego's marketing, their website, they're touting all their environmental credentials. So every business these days is doing that. Because it's good business sense and also, ethical. So it's all about reducing our carbon footprint. How much CO2 do we as individuals and our institutions and our businesses put into the atmosphere in a year? What would it take to become carbon neutral? To become carbon neutral, we have to change our habits. So for example, many of you, I'm sure, many of us think, that we should be eating organic food because it has fewer toxic chemicals in it, or no toxic chemicals, and that's certainly true. But if our organic blueberries are coming from Peru, which they did this winter, and Chile, right, the transportation costs are much higher than if we were eating local. And so as I say, it's complicated, right? Not easy to make these decisions. So buying from local suppliers, and then you say, well, local organic, would be the best. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the issue, 2 million of these kinds of plastic water bottles, I have one here, right? In the world are opened every 15 minutes. 2 million every 15 minutes. So we have to change our habits if we're going to become more sustainable. Some architects are embracing this. So Morphosis in California, their head offices are in LA, Santa Monica. And we don't usually think of Morphosis as kind of sustainability architects. We think of it as a high design office, right? Very important design office. But they're very keen about sustainability. So they decided that they had to become a model themselves. And so they built their new offices, and it's a net zero building. They produce more energy with this building than they consume. So they can now say to their clients, do as we do, right? We believe in this, we're doing it ourselves, we think you should do it. So, as I said, buildings, not only buildings in cities, but buildings everywhere in the US consume about 40% of the total energy consumed in the country. So it's a significant proportion. The building industry is a big consumer of natural resources. So the extraction of natural resources, the mining, the use of natural resources, we are a major consumer of natural resources, or our business is a major consumer of natural resources. We are big consumers of water. Well, a lot of water is required to manufacture building materials, and of course, most building materials are manufactured using high amounts of fossil fuel. The building industry pumps a lot of pollution into the environment, and it generates 40% of everything that goes to landfill. So everything that goes to landfill, 40% of that is construction waste from construction sites. So buildings in the US use a lot of water. Unfortunately, water is not an issue in Buffalo. We seem to have a lot of it. So we don't worry about it yet. But it's the most important environmental issue in large parts of the United States, mostly west of the Mississippi. Water is highly contested. Who owns the rights to be able to use this water? Is it farmers? Is it suburbs? Is it cities? Who gets the water? And as the drought has taken root across the western United States, there's less and less water that's being fought over more and more energetically, shall we say. So does sustainable design cost more? Sometimes, not always. It is possible to use resources responsibly and to be very careful about the choice of materials that we use, and to think about the orientation of our buildings and how we can encourage passive servicing without necessarily introducing extra costs. But sometimes it does cost more. So this brings us to the question of different kinds of architectural clients. So these are two broad categories of architectural clients. So the owner-occupier client is usually, for example, a government or a university like UB, or maybe a hospital system or a school system. These are owner-occupiers who take the long view, right? They're in it for the long haul. A developer builds buildings for profit and looks to recover their costs in a period of about 10 years. And often at the end of that period, they will sell the project on. So it's not to say all owner-occupier clients are good and all developer clients are bad. There are some very enlightened developers these days, but it is to say owner-occupiers take a long view and are therefore going to be more interested in sustainability than people who have a very short-term frame of view. Also, just to say, as I mentioned before, there are developers who are very enlightened, both for ethical reasons, but because also there's an increasing market demand among people for sustainable projects, for green design. And they are finding that green projects are highly marketable. So green houses and condos command higher prices. Green office buildings command higher rents. Right? So again, it makes good business sense as well as embracing some of the ethical issues. So that brings us then to the question of construction costs versus life cycle costs. So construction costs are what they say, the cost to construct the project. We often refer to these as the upfront costs. Right? How much does it cost to build the building? And the components of construction costs are, of course, materials, labor, and time. Time is money on the construction site, right? So materials, labor, and time. We know from what's going on at the moment that material costs have shot up, labor costs are going up. So if we were designing a building going out to bid at the moment, we'd be holding our breath to see what prices we might get back, because the costs are going to go up. Those are our upfront costs. The life cycle costs are different. They're the cost of operating and maintaining the building over its full life. So what goes into that? Literally the operating costs. How much does it cost to heat, cool, and light the building over the full years of its life? How much does it cost to maintain and repair the building? So if, for example, we, in our construction culture, we are often required to accept the lowest bid. And the lowest bid will have the lowest quality materials, and the lowest quality materials will require more frequent maintenance and replacement. Right? If we had higher construction costs, we might have lower maintenance costs. So we have the operating costs, we have the maintenance and repair costs, and then we have the health of the occupants costs. So have you heard about sick buildings? Sick buildings? Buildings in which the interior atmosphere of the building makes the occupants unwell. They don't come to work. They have a low level of productivity. Not so good, right? That's not good for business, right? It's not good for your labor productivity. So the assumption is that if we have, the way that kind of often works is you say, oh, well, the lower the construction cost, the higher the life cycle cost. Right? The lower our specifications, we're not insulating the building as well, we're not providing such high quality windows, et cetera, then our life cycle costs are going to go up. And then people assume, oh, if we have high construction costs, we'll have low life cycle costs. Hopefully. The goal is to have low construction costs, low life cycle costs. So the model for sustainable design is nature itself. Nature operates on cyclical processes that are self-sustaining and waste nothing. So that's our model. And there are many criteria that we have to juggle when we're thinking about sustainable design. We've talked about the types of clients, life cycle costs versus construction costs, the economy, all kinds of things that we have to think about. So it's never a simple answer. And of course, all of these questions are wrapped up with politics and economics as well. So for example, this is making the point, so when you buy gas at the pump, it's got ethanol mixed in with it. And ethanol is a corn product, comes from corn. So then the question increasingly is, should we be using agricultural land to grow corn to make gasoline, fuel, or should we be using agricultural land to grow food for people? Interesting question, right? A few examples of things that are happening around the world in terms of sustainability. The European Union requires all new buildings to aim for net zero energy, to generate as much or more energy than they consume. So if you're looking for really good examples of sustainable buildings, it's good to look at buildings that have been built in Austria and Germany, for example, because they have very strict regulations, very advanced regulations and laws about sustainability. They also, most if not most countries in the European Union do not have their own oil and natural gas supplies. They're purchasing from others. So they have turned increasingly and very emphatically towards sustainable energy sources like solar and wind. So Denmark, which is a tiny little country, is one of the leading players in the design and manufacture of wind turbines in the world. For this reason, both land-based and turbine farms that are on the water. This is an image of the Reichstag. This is the National Parliament building in Germany that was bombed in World War II. It was restored in 2000 by Foster and Partners with many sustainable aspects to the building. So it's a historic building that's been restored. So the German government says, we want to set an example for our own national parliament building. So the dome over the parliament chamber, you can see the mirrored reflector that reflects daylight down into the parliament chamber. The slanted pedal that you see on the dome follows the sun during the day to shade the dome. It moves, follows the sun. And the entire building is heated by vegetable oil produced by that crop that you see there, which is called rapeseed. So again, they're setting an example themselves. Denmark has a waste to energy policy. So almost every town of any size in Denmark has a waste to energy plan. That means that when they collect the trash, it goes to these plants and it is burned to produce energy. This one is designed by Big. And you can see, and it's built now. These are renderings, but this is built. And you can see that it has a ski slope on the roof, a 2,000-foot ski slope on the roof. It also has the world's tallest climbing wall. So this is an architect thinking, how can we combine this idea of the waste to energy and then also do something for people, an amenity for people, so it isn't just an industrial facility. And this produces enough power for 62,000 homes. So every community has these, and it's a national policy. So in the US, what we don't tend to have national policies, although we do have this national system, which I'm sure you're all aware of. leadership in energy and design system. And the graph at the bottom just shows the increasing market for green building design and construction. I looked at this and said, oh, this stops at 2015. This is a rather old graph. I couldn't find anything with more recent years on it. Like, it all seemed to stop there. But I'm sure the market has continued to grow. I don't think that that's the issue. And certainly the market for building materials, green building materials, is also growing year on year in the US. There's increasing interest in it, even though we don't have national requirements that we have to do this. So LEED is voluntary. It's a point system. And if you build a building, as a building owner, you can apply for LEED certification, and you can be certified silver, gold, or platinum, right? Silver is the lowest, then gold, then platinum. And you get points for sustainable site design, improving water efficiency of the building, reducing the amount of energy used in the building, sourcing materials locally or within 500 miles of the building site to reduce building costs, transportation costs, using sustainable materials, and the indoor environmental quality of the building. So it's a good system, and you can, but one thing I would say about it is you can have a LEED platinum building that might not be such a great design. So it doesn't ensure design quality. It is a kind of sustainability metric. So the goal, the bar on the left of this graph is the amount of energy consumed by a code-compliant building. If you design everything according to what the building code requires you to do, this might be your energy consumption. If you're going for LEED rating, or you're thinking about sustainability, the goal is, of course, to reduce all of that as a design phase, and then also to design it in anticipation that you'll actually perform better than the design prediction. So a couple of examples. The New York Times built a new headquarters tower in Manhattan about 10, 15 years ago, designed by Renzo Piano. And this building is not LEED certified. It's very expensive for owners to apply for certification. This building is not LEED certified, not because the owner didn't want to pay for it, because Piano said, our buildings always perform better than LEED. Like, there's no point in doing this. So, yes, no, maybe. So LEED's purely voluntary, but the reason that it's been successful in the US is because these owner-occupier clients, like city governments and state governments and the national government, who own huge amounts of buildings, have made it a requirement. Universities have made it a requirement. So all new buildings at UB are required to be LEED Silver minimum. And that's helped to make it successful. This is the Clinton Library, Presidential Library in Little Rock, Arkansas, by Emiad Architects. It was built about 10, 15 years ago and certified LEED Silver. It's a good example of being LEED certified and being a good design. So what did they get points for? They got points for reusing a brownfield site. 40% of their building materials were manufactured within a 500-mile radius of the site. So they're supporting regional industry and reducing transportation costs. The energy use is 25% less than a standard building. So you say, how can that be? It's like a fully glazed envelope in the south of the US. It must be totally air conditioned and very hot. Well, it's a fritted glass. It's got a dot screen on it, so it reflects a lot of the solar gain. It saves 300,000 gallons of water a year. And the thermal mass of the concrete slabs is being used to help to heat and cool the building. All the heating and cooling is delivered at floor level instead of ceiling level. That reduces energy costs. You're delivering your services at floor level instead of through at ceiling level. It reduces energy costs. So that's how they got their LEED certification. The AIA is in on the game as well. The Committee on the Environment has a number of LEED headings, that their measures of sustainability, which relate to all the same topics, right? Natural ventilation, natural daylight, how much water do you use, how much energy do you use, what materials and construction. So on the state level, California is one of the leaders, as they are in many things environmental. And one of the reasons that that's important is because the economy of California is huge, and they can basically say to their power suppliers, you are required to obtain X% of your energy from renewable sources. And that makes a big difference, right? Because the market there is so big. They also have very advanced legislation in terms of building performance. So for example, big box retail in California is required to have what's called a cool roof. What is a cool roof? Very simple. It's a white roof membrane that reflects solar gain. And all of their big box retail is required to have skylights to reduce the lighting costs, right? So if we're reflecting solar gain, we're reducing the cooling loads of the building and the cooling costs of the building. So cool roofs are very popular, of course, in the southern, hot, sunny parts of the US. But if you go out Center for the Arts on North Campus and you go onto the roof, it's an entirely white roofscape. So it's a cool roof. Even all the mechanical plant is painted white to reflect the solar gain and reduce the cooling costs for that building. All new houses in California as of 2020 are required to have solar panels. Phoenix, which is, a very hot desert city, ran an architectural competition in 2019 to provide a net zero house. And this was the winner, and the plans and the specs for this house were available for free download on the City of Phoenix government website. So this house uses 30% of the energy of a code-compliant house. And so it's reduced the energy consumption by 70% through using very thick SIPs, very high insulated SIP panels. It has a cool roof. It has a solar chimney. So a solar chimney encourages natural ventilation and cooling. And it uses air source heat pumps for heating and cooling. So, that's something that the city government has done and is encouraging people to download this for free and to use it. New York State is one of the top 10 states for green policy. And in 2019, both New York City and the state introduced new laws to reduce CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. So they said, buildings have to reduce their carbon footprint. And this applies to all existing buildings and all new construction. So this is one of the most ambitious goals in the nation, and last year, New York City said they banned the use of natural gas to heat and cool new buildings. Because it's a fossil fuel, so they're saying all new buildings have to find other ways of being heated and cooled. And many cities and states now have regulations about what you can and cannot take to landfill, and they're requiring contractors by law to recycle building waste from construction sites, so it doesn't go to landfill. So, on the top is the photograph of Gates Circle Hospital, which was a 10-story hospital building at Gates Circle, which was imploded about 7 years ago now. It was imploded on the site, it was destroyed. And all of that waste was, stacked up on the site. And it was all sorted through, and it was all recycled. So all the steel was pulled out, it was recycled. All the concrete was ground up, and was used for aggregate on other projects. So it wasn't taken to landfill, it was recycled. So, even you say all these things are happening everywhere else, they're happening in Buffalo too. So this is some, building materials that we commonly use. And we know that their embodied energy consists of how much energy is used in manufacture, transforming it from nature to the building product that we want to use, and the transportation cost, how much does it cost to transport. So wood is the kind of benchmark. That's our, of course, model material in terms of sustainability. And you can see how the other materials stack up relative to it. And you can see here that aluminum, to make aluminum, uses 126 times the amount of energy of equivalent amount of wood. Aluminum uses a lot of water in its manufacturing process, a lot of fossil fuel. And yet, if you look at the ads for aluminum frame curtain walling, they're telling us that we should use aluminum curtain walling because it is super sustainable, because we can recycle it. They're not telling us about the high manufacturing costs. They're saying, and it's true, we can recycle aluminum, right? We can reuse it. So every building product now that you will look at, the advertising, is going to tell you how sustainable it is. And its sustainable attributes. But you have to be careful and look at the whole picture. So on the left is an ad for MDF, platinum grade sustainable panel, MDF panels, because they don't have formaldehyde in their glues. They're made of recycled materials, so these are good things. Toilets that save water. Every toilet now is designed to save water and fluff, and so on. So every building product is sustainable, if you believe the advertising. Okay. So this book, Cradle to Cradle, is written by an architect called William McDonough. You don't need to remember his name, but you do need to think about the cradle to cradle concept. This is the office that Martha Baum worked for about 5 to 7 years. So this is very much influenced her thinking. William McDonough is a leading advocate for sustainable practices. So the Cradle to Cradle book is clearly a play on the phrase cradle to grave. So his argument is no material should go to the grave. We should conduct ourselves so that everything is recycled all the time, right? That nothing is discarded. There is no waste. So that's the principle. And what he talks about is he says, well, usually we think of wood as a good material and plastic as a bad material. But he said they're both okay as long as you don't mix them together and as long as you continue to recycle all of them and you're not sending them to waste. You're not creating waste. So he calls wood a biological nutrient and he calls plastic a technical nutrient. So they're okay, both are okay as long as we don't mix them together. In his thinking. So his goal is to eliminate waste, or the goal of his philosophy is to eliminate waste, to use nature as the model, this constant cyclical recycling in which there is no waste. So in his thinking, waste equals raw material. Like, how do we use waste as raw material? How do we use renewable energy? How do we reduce water use? And how do we think about, encourage businesses to think not only about profit, but about social responsibility? So a few examples. We all wear fleece all the time. It's super, right? And it's made from recycled plastic. So that's a good thing. McDonough designed a fabric that's used for office furnishings, which obviously consumes a lot of fabric every year. And it's a combination of plant material and sheep's wool. And when it's worn out, it can be composted because it doesn't have chemicals in it. And then it becomes nutrients for new crops to feed sheep to make new fabric. So it's a virtuous cycle, shall we say. And sheep's wool is even being used now as an insulation product. It's very good for insulation. It's very fire resistant. It's a bit expensive as an insulation product at the moment, but there are people proposing that it should be used more widely. So wood is our greenest material for all kinds of reasons that we've talked about. But we have a bit of a dilemma, right? Which is the more wood that we use, the more we're reducing the forests that cover the earth, that help to sustain us. And so the search is on for biological, non-wood-based alternative products. So this is a book called Transmaterial, from a book called Transmaterial. It's an encyclopedia of experimental building materials that inventors are trying to bring to market. And this product is called SLP, starch-bound low-density wood-based panel. That's a mouthful. It's a combination of wood shavings and sawdust baked with yeast in an oven, like bread, to make a hard, aerated, foamed panel. Wheat board is being manufactured, so it's obviously using agricultural waste, not just from wheat, but from all kinds of crops, to press together with glues to make board. So this can be used for things like cabinets. It cannot be used for sheathing. It's not structurally related. It's much lower density, but it's being used widely for cabinetry, for example. But the big one is bamboo. And this has penetrated furthest into our building industry. It's been used for centuries in Asia, of course, for buildings large and small. So all of the skyscrapers in Asia, the scaffolding for those buildings is made of bamboo, not steel. So here we use steel scaffolding, there they use bamboo. And this has been done for many, many years. Bamboo is very, very strong. It's very fast growing, so some species grow up to 2 feet per day. They grow 60 to 80 feet tall in a season, and in 5 years can produce material as hard as a 60-year-old oak tree. Most of the bamboo that we use at the moment in the building industry comes from China. And so this just makes the point that bamboo that's grown in China and put on a container ship to the US costs less than wood products which are grown in the US and trucked across the country. This is because shipping costs, on the scale of embodied energy, shipping costs are the least expensive way of transporting materials, then rail, then truck. And truck's the most expensive. We rely heavily on trucking. So bamboo requires no pesticides, it requires no herbicides or fertilizers. It's chopped each year, and then new bamboo grows from the existing roots. It does not have to be replanted every spring like other crops that we use, or even like our spruce trees. If we cut down a spruce tree, we have to replant it, plant a seedling to replace it. So recently now, bamboo is starting to be grown in the US for the construction industry, commercially. And so there are some bamboo growers apparently in Florida and Alabama now producing for the building industry. Okay, so let's take a break. I'll see you back in 5 minutes. And we'll talk about